I already well knew before this that although these strange three-brained beings there have again learned to utilize such sources from cosmic formations for their, as they say, lighting, yet these means for this lighting of theirs are obtained by them with the aid of very complicated adaptations. And these adaptations are accessible only where there is a large group of them. And suddenly there was this lighting, so far from any such group, and particularly in the absence around the place of any signs by which, among contemporary beings, such possibilities are in general accompanied. And when I saw the aforementioned vibrometer for measuring the degree of the vivifyingness of vibrations, the impulse of astonishment in me, as I've already said, increased to the highest degree. I was yet the more astonished because, concerning this, I also already knew very well that at that period there, nowhere did there exist such apparatuses by means of which it is possible to count any vibrations whatever. And therefore I again wondered, from where could this venerable old man, dwelling in these wild mountains so far from the beings composing contemporary civilization, have obtained such apparatuses? Notwithstanding this interest of mine, I did not venture to ask the venerable Haji Asvat's Truve for an explanation just then. I did not venture to ask him because it was to be feared that such a digressive question might change the course of the conversation which had begun, and from which I expected the elucidation of the chief question which interested me. In this section of the cave were many other apparatuses yet unknown to me, among which stood one very strange apparatus to which were attached several what are called masks, from which something like pipes made from the throats of cows went somewhere up to the ceiling of the cave. Through these pipes, as I also afterwards learned, the air necessary for the breathing of the beings present during the experiments could flow in from outside, because this interior was then closed hermetically on all sides. The beings who were present during these experiments wore over their faces those masks which were on this strange apparatus. When we were all seated on the floor, in the said section of the cave, the venerable Haji Asvat's Truve said, among other things, that during the period of his investigations he and his friend the Dervish Kerbalai Aziz Nuraran had also occasion to study very thoroughly all the theories existing on the earth about vibrations made at any time by serious terrestrial scientists. He said, "We studied the Assyrian theory of the great Malmanash, and the Arabian theory of the famous Selne-e-Avaz, and the Greek of the philosopher Pythagoras, and of course all the Chinese theories. And we made apparatuses exactly similar to those with which all these ancient sages made their experiments. And we even made an addition to one of their apparatuses, which is now the chief one for my experiments. With this apparatus, Pythagoras made his experiments, and it was then called a monochord. But now that I've altered it, I call it a vibroshow." Having said this, he pressed something on the floor with one hand, and with the other he pointed to a very strangely shaped apparatus standing there, and added that it was the same altered monochord. The apparatus he pointed to consisted of a 2-meter board, the whole front half of which was divided into sections called frets, like the neck of a sound-producing instrument called guitar, and on it was stretched only one string. To the other half of this board were fastened a great number of vibrometers like those on the strings of the grand piano, and they were fixed in such a way that their indicating needles came just over the mentioned frets on the front side of the board. To the back half of this board was fastened a whole network of various small glass and metal pipes, which also served to produce sounds. But this time, sounds obtained from vibrations arising from certain movements of currents, of ordinary or of artificially compressed or rarefied air. And for measuring the vibrations of these sounds, the same vibrometers served as were used for measuring the vibrations arising from the string. The Venerable Haji Asvat's Truv was about to say something, but just then, from another section of the cave, a small boy of the type called Uzbek entered, carrying on a tray a tea service and some green tea. When the boy had set the tray before us and had left, the Venerable Haji began to pour out the tea into the cups, and turning to us jokingly, uttered the following sentence, used on such occasions in that locality: "Let us imbibe this gift of nature in the devout hope that it may redound to her glory." Having uttered this, he continued further, "I already feel that my sustaining forces are abating within me, and hence I must imbibe the due quantity of what can aid the animation of the whole of myself until the next dose." And with a gentle smile, he began to drink his tea. While he was drinking it, I decided to take the opportunity to ask him about several questions which were all the time worrying me. First of all, I asked him the following. I said, "Highly esteemed Haji, until now, I have been fully convinced that nowhere on the earth does there exist an apparatus for the exact measurement of vibrations. Yet here I see so many of these measuring apparatuses. How am I to understand this? Where did you get them?" To this, the Venerable Haji Asvat's Truv replied as follows. "These apparatuses for our experiments were made by my deceased friend, Kerbalai Aziz Nuraran, and it is chiefly to them that I am indebted for all my attainments in the knowledge of the laws of vibrations. Indeed," he continued, "there once existed on the earth at the time of the flourishing of the great Tikliamish all kinds of similar apparatuses, but at the present time there are none of these apparatuses, unless of course one reckons that, so to say, childish bauble now existing there in Europe, by means of which vibrations can, as it were, be counted, and which there in Europe is called a siren. I even had such a siren when I began my elucidatory experiments. This siren was invented 2 centuries ago by a certain learned physician named Zebek, and it was, so to say, perfected in the middle of the last century by a certain Cognard de la Tour. The construction of this childish bauble consists in this, that a current of condensed air is directed from a pipe into a revolving disc, drilled with little holes, each hole exactly coinciding in size with the opening of the main air pipe. And as this disc revolves, the passage for the current of the air entering these holes from the main pipe is alternately opened and closed. And thus, during the rapid revolution of this disc, successive shocks of air are obtained in the holes, and these produce an even-pitched tone of sound, and the